Rome was on a roll. Its armies were unstoppable, organized, relentless, and ruthless. They pushed forward in perfect lines, building roads as they advanced, and leaving defeated kingdoms and tribes in their wake. No one seemed able to resist. Rome looked like a force that couldn't be beaten. But then, they met a people who didn't give in. This group wasn't a formal kingdom, or even a united nation. They had no capital city, no famous generals, and no written history. They lived in small villages scattered across the rough lands of what is now Portugal and western Spain. And they wanted nothing to do with Roman control. Rome hit them hard, wiping out entire communities. But one leader rose from the chaos, a warrior who would become a serious threat to Rome. His people didn't fight head-on. They used the land to their advantage. Thick forests, rocky hills, and hidden valleys. They hit fast, vanished just as quickly, and were impossible to pin down. Today, they're sometimes called a ghost tribe, but they had a name, the Lucatanians. This is their story. Before we talk about the war with Rome, it helps to understand who the Lucatanians were. Where did they come from? What was their life like before the conflict? To find out, we have to go back, way back, to a time before Rome reached the Iberian Peninsula, before cities like Lisbon or Salamanca were even founded. The Lusitanians lived in the western interior of the region, between the Douro River to the north and the Tagus to the south. That area now covers parts of northern and central Portugal, along with sections of western Spain. Back then, it was wild and untamed. There were no clear borders, just thick forests, rough hills, and deep valleys. The harsh landscape shaped the way the Lusitanians lived. Farming wasn't easy. Travel was slow and risky. Some villages were hidden away in places so remote they were nearly invisible. Survival in this land required strength, skill, and community. The people depended on one another to get by. The land didn't just influence them. It was a core part of who they were. Because of the terrain, the Lusitanians didn't build large cities. They lived in fortified hilltop villages called castros. These small settlements were easy to defend and gave them a view of the land around them. Each castro usually belonged to one tribe or clan, led by someone chosen not because of birthright or wealth, but for their courage, wisdom, and leadership. Leaders earned their position by proving themselves, either in battle or during hard times. But that power wasn't permanent. If they failed their people, someone else would take their place. The Lusitanians didn't follow kings. They followed those they trusted. They weren't isolated either. Over time, they traded and interacted with other groups, including Celtic tribes who had moved through the region. They adopted iron weapons and tools, shared ideas, and exchanged goods. Still, they kept their own language, customs, and way of life. Religion played a big role. The Lusitanians believed in many gods and spirits tied to nature, rivers, animals, forests, even the weather. One of their most important gods was Endovelicus, linked to health and prophecy. Another, Ategina, was associated with spring and renewal. Sacred places in nature, like caves or mountaintops, serve as their temples. Their beliefs weren't just about farming or health. They were also tied to war. Fighting bravely was seen as a way to honor the gods and ancestors. Before battles, warriors often performed rituals, sometimes including sacrifices. They believed they were fighting for something sacred, for their people, their land, and their traditions. So when Rome showed up, an outside force that didn't respect their ways or their freedom, the Lusitanians refused to surrender. Rome didn't come as an enemy at first. During the Second Punic War against Carthage, 218 to 201 BC, Rome slowly expanded into Iberia. When they won that war, they claimed Carthage's territories, including parts of the peninsula. At first, the Lusitanians felt little impact. They lived farther west, away from the main Roman focus. But over time, Roman forces moved closer. They built roads, set up camps, and demanded taxes, food, and labor. It became clear that Rome wasn't just passing through. They were staying. The Lusitanians had no kings to negotiate peace. They didn't recognize Roman authority and didn't want foreign rulers. Promises of peace and prosperity fell hollow. Some land were taken. People were forced to hand over grain and livestock. Sacred sites were disturbed. By 194 BC, they had enough and struck first. Instead of waiting for Rome to invade, the Lusitanians launched attacks on Roman patrols and supply lines. They didn't fight in the open like Rome preferred. They used hit-and-run tactics, ambushing soldiers in narrow valleys, burning outposts, and disappearing into the hills. They fought on foot or on nimble local horses that could handle the tough terrain. They used javelins, short swords, and slings, simple weapons, but deadly in skilled hands. Roman troops, trained for large battlefield formations, didn't know how to deal with these fast, unpredictable fighters. The Lusitanians never stayed in one place for long. They used scouts, set traps, and led Roman forces into wild goose chases through forests and mountains. The Romans quickly learned that this wasn't going to be an easy conquest. The Lusitanians had no central capital to capture, no single ruler to negotiate with. All they had was their land, their community, and their determination to stay free. So the question is, if someone came promising peace but took everything instead, what would you do? The Lusitanians made their choice. And for Rome, the real war was just beginning. By the middle of the 2nd century BC, Rome was struggling to gain control of Lusitania. They had conquered powerful rivals across the Mediterranean. But here, things were different. The Lusitanians kept resisting. Every village Rome destroyed seemed to inspire more fighters. Every Roman victory only made things worse. Then, in 179 BC, a Roman commander named Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus arrived. He took a different approach. Instead of pushing for more war, he tried diplomacy. Gracchus listened to the Lusitanians, respected their ways, and offered peace. He allowed them to rebuild, farm, and live without constant interference. Tired of endless fighting, many leaders agreed. A fragile peace took hold. But Gracchus eventually returned to Rome, and his understanding approach left with him. The leaders who followed didn't share his respect. They believed peace would only come with total control. Then came Servius Sulpicius Galba. In 152 BC, Galba arrived in Lusitania determined to crush the resistance completely. But he didn't lead with troops, he used deception. Knowing the Lusitanians were still recovering, Galba sent messages offering peace. He promised land and safety in return for disarmament. Remembering the earlier peace under Gracchus, many leaders accepted the offer. Thousands of Lusitanians gathered at a designated meeting point. Entire families came, hopeful for a fresh start. They brought tools, food, and supplies. The men arrived without weapons to show trust. Then came the betrayal. Roman soldiers closed in dug trenches and blocked every exit. The Lusitanians were trapped. Then the slaughter began. Over 9,000 unarmed men were killed. Women and children were taken and sold into slavery. Many shipped off to distant lands. Galba returned to Rome rich from the plunder. He expected praise. But even some Roman officials were stunned by the brutality. Galba faced no consequences for what he did. Despite the scale of the massacre, no one punished him. It wasn't justice. It was a calculated act of cruelty. But even in that dark moment, something survived. One young man made it out. His name was Viratus. He wasn't a noble. He didn't have an army. He wasn't a leader. Yet, he was a shepherd. But that day changed everything. He saw betrayal up close. His family was gone. His people were slaughtered. From that moment on, he carried a fire that Rome would come to fear. Viratus didn't come from power. He grew up in the hills of Lusitania, guiding flocks, sleeping outdoors, and learning the land. That life gave him skills no Roman training could teach. How to move unnoticed, read nature's signs, and survive with almost nothing. After Galba's massacre in 152 BC, Viratus disappeared into the wilderness. But he wasn't running. He was waiting. Then he started building something new. Not an army, but a cause. He didn't offer riches. He didn't preach revenge. He earned the trust of other warriors with calm judgment and unwavering loyalty. He was smart, patient, and grounded. When different tribal leaders disagreed, they turned to him for guidance. Eventually, they chose him to lead. At the time, the resistance was a patchwork of scattered groups, each fighting alone. Viratus knew that had to change. Rome was too strong to beat in uncoordinated skirmishes. So he brought the tribes together. He trained them to fight as one, not with Roman tactics, but with the strengths they already had: speed, surprise, and mastery of the terrain. In 147 BC, Viriatus began a focused campaign. He didn't face Rome in open battle. He used the landscape as a weapon: mountains, forests, valleys. His forces launched surprise attacks, hit supply routes, and vanished before the Romans could strike back. He turned the battlefield into a puzzle Rome couldn't solve. Roman armies were used as structure, marching in order, fighting face to face. Viriatus broke all the rules. His ambushes were relentless. Troops were trapped in narrow passes. Scouts went missing. Supplies vanished. Commanders walked into traps. And each Roman defeat added to Viriatus's growing reputation. By now, Rome knew they were facing more than scattered rebels. Viriatus had transformed resistance into a calculated war effort. The Senate responded by sending some of their best commanders: Caesius, Fabius Maximus Aemilianus, and Quintus Pompeius. All three failed. One, Caius Vitellius, led 10,000 troops straight into an ambush. Around 4,000 were killed or captured. His replacement called for help from allied Celtiberian troops, but those forces never made it. Viriatus's fighters wiped them out before they could even join the battle. By 141 BC, Rome signed peace with Viriatus, a Lucatanian shepherd-turned-commander who outwitted its armies. He kept his word, but Rome didn't. They bribed his closest allies to assassinate him. His death ended the resistance, but his legacy outlived the empire that tried to erase him.